So if you know metal bands, then you've definitely heard of the band Metallica, one of the most successful, actually the most successful metal band of all time. And they've been around for about 40 plus years and have made a bunch of albums. So in this video, I'm going to rank them all on a tier list from worst to best. We're going to see which albums are the best, which ones are the worst, you probably know it all. I'm going to give my opinions. I'm a bit more on the younger side, I guess, in this. I didn't really grow up Metallica, but interesting to see. I'm a huge music guy, obviously. If you enjoy this video, make sure to subscribe and tell me other bands I should do tier lists on. But without further ado, let's get into the video. So the first album we have is their debut album, Kill 'Em All. Now, Kill 'Em All is a pretty good album. Most of it is pretty, what I would guess we'll call, like, it bleeds thrash metal. A lot of it is very generic 80s thrash metal. It doesn't really, it's very safe. There's a couple of really cool moments, like the bass solo, although it is, again, just a bass solo. A lot of the songs are very safe. There's nothing that's really, like, pushing the edge. Seek and Destroy is really good. You know, Four Horsemen's really good. Hit the Lights is pretty good too. My favorite track on this album is actually Jump in the Fire, which is probably the most poppy song, I guess you could say. But again, this album's very, like, modern, like, I guess, like, it's very old school thrash metal. It's not very, like, inventive. It doesn't have, like, any extra, like, amazement to it. All the songs kind of sound the same on this album, but it's still not a bad album. I'm actually going to put it in A tier. I think it's a great album. It's a very good debut album. The band's finding themselves. They haven't quite figured out their style yet. They just bleed their influences, basically. But it's not a bad album overall. Alright, next up, we have Ride the Lightning, which is going to be an S tier. There's only going to be like 2 albums that are going to be an S tier, and Ride the Lightning is one of them. It is a extremely well-crafted album. As an album experience, it is one of the 2 best. It's extremely well crafted from the beginning to the end. Every single song on this album has a place. It has a good theme. It all works well together. Obviously, it had the first ballad, Fade to Black. It had some amazing songs like Creeping Death, Call of Cthulhu, Who For Whom the Bell Tolls, Ride the Lightning, from Fight Fire with Fire, which is super thrashy, and really one of the heaviest Metallica songs ever, if I'm being completely honest. Obviously, there are 2 songs in this album that are, like, kind of on the mid-side, that being Trapped Under Ice and Escape. Escape being the one song that Metallica actually hate with a passion, but it has a lot going for it. It's got so many cool moments. It's definitely not their most ambitious thing they've ever done, but this is them sort of starting to find themselves a bit more. They're getting more into their style. There's a reason that this album tends to be in the top. It's really, really compelling, but unfortunately, we're gonna have to put it in second place because at number 1, we have our next album, Master Puppets. This is, if you guys are wanting to know my list, I'm gonna spoil it now. Master Puppets is number 1, and I think it's number 1 for many different reasons. It's got a lot going for it. Again, like Ride the Lightning, it is a very amazing album experience. However, I think that it is a much better album experience than Ride the Lightning. Part of that's obviously the production. Part of that is honestly just, you know, the way the album sounds. But the themes on this album, the songs, I can't think of a single weak song. The weakest song on this album is probably the ending track, Damage Incorporated. And even then, it's not even weak. It's a really, really solid in-your-face punch in the face. Left Messiah is the other one I can think of, but even still, Left Messiah's got this real power to it. It's probably the most generic song on the album, but it's still really good. Obviously, Battery is amazing. Battery is probably one of my all-time favorite Metallica songs. Master Puppets is just amazing. The thing that should not be is, again, heavy as hell. Welcome Home Sanitarium is probably the best Metallica song. I wouldn't say it's my personal favorite, but it's definitely the most well-crafted Metallica song, I think. I actually think it's better than Master Puppets for that specific reason of I think it's just done a bit better. But at the same time, Every song on this album is amazing, and Orion is an absolute masterpiece of an instrumental. It's actually, for me, I've noticed there's parts of it that aren't as good as I remember it being, but it was still really, really, really good. So, you know, again, this album is probably the only one that I can listen to it in its entirety and like kind of lock into it. Again, I'm ranking these guys on albums, not necessarily the songs on the album. I'm talking about the album experience from start to finish. If you were to sit through and listen to the whole thing from start to finish, and Master Puppets does the best job. Alright, and Justice for All. This one is going... I'm going to put it in A tier. Now, I love this album. It's going to go above Kill 'Em All too. I love this album. I actually think that if the production on this album was good, this album could potentially knock Master Puppets over. This album has, I think, some of my favorite crafted songs. I think Blackened is amazing. One, obviously, is incredible. Like, there's definitely a couple of things holding it back. Like, you know, The Eye of Beholder is not that interesting. Dyer's Eve is really, really amazing, but it's also kind of generic. And To Live Is To Die is, like, probably the weakest instrumental of all time. It's got a really good middle section, but it also has a lot of just fluck around it. This, again, is going into one of Metallica's biggest, what I would call, faults, is that they tend to overdo things. But I think what really holds this album back, for me, is just the fact that the production is so bad. The guitar tone is good, but it's also a bit distracting. The drums are bad, and let's be real, there's no bass, and it sucks, and it is what it is. But yeah, I think this album has the most potential. I definitely think that it's better than Kill 'Em All, just because Kill 'Em All kind of is like the same song times 10. Like, every song on this album does have like a unique feel to it. There are some highlights. The Shortest Straw is amazing. Fred Ends of Sanity is, holy goddamn, it is insane. But I definitely don't think that this album deserves to be any higher than it is. But now we have the Black Album. The Black Album is Metallica's best-selling album of all time. It features, if you've never heard of Metallica, you've probably heard the song Enter Sandman or Nothing Else Matters. This album is incredible. It's probably their best produced album of all time. It's, I guess, what you would call the band's... It wouldn't be the band's magnum opus. That would probably be Master of Puppets. But I think that in terms of production, this album just takes the cake. It's definitely got some quirks to it. Like, this album's not perfect. There are definitely some factors of this album that I just cannot wrap my head around. That being the last two songs of the album. I think if this album was kind of... If this album had fewer songs, I think it would be way stronger. I think this album has a lot of fluff. I think there's some really cool ideas, but like Enter Sandman, Sad But True, Holier Than Thou, The Unforgiven, Wherever I May Roam, Nothing Else Matters, and that's kind of like what I would call like the good songs. They're like the God songs on this album. They're all amazing. But then you've got like Don't Tread on Me is pretty good. Through the Never is okay, but it's a bit generic. The Struggle Within, I think, is a really bad song. I don't think it's very good. My Friend of Misery, I think, if it was an instrumental, it could have been really cool. There's some cool aspects of it. I think the actual main riff was cool, and you could have made it a very, very interesting song. I think what ruins My Friend of Misery for me is the chorus. I think the chorus is really bad, and it's like the only part of the song that I don't like. Everything else is fine. It has really cool solos, has a really good harmony. The Guy That Failed has probably a heavier riff than Sad But True, if I'm being completely honest. But it definitely is a bit stronger. Through the Never is whatever. I think this album was trying to be very mainstream, and they also didn't do a good job of some of the hooks. Which I guess happens. It's not a bad... like I said, this album's still really good. I would put this top of A tier without a heartbeat. It could potentially go on S tier, but I'm going to leave it in A tier just because I think that the flaws hold it back. I think if this album got rid of The Struggle Within and maybe Through the Never, this album would be a lot stronger. And if they had like worked on the other songs, made it a bit better. But at the same time, history's history. It's the best selling album of all time, so it's not like, you know, we have to, you know, critiquing this album's a bit of a joke considering the fact that it's made so much money that critiquing it is kind of pointless at this point. Alright, and now we have the Load and Reload albums. Now, it's funny enough because these albums have drastically different qualities, in my opinion. I'm also going to knock this to B tier as well, just to make it a bit more fair. Load for me is a B tier album. I think it's a very interesting album. The biggest aspect of this album that kind of ruins it is the fact that it's meant to be a Metallica album. And when you look at it through that category, some of the songs feel very weird. And the songs definitely feel they're very forgetful. That's something I've noticed with this album, and especially with the next one. I'm just going to put Reload right now. D tier. Actually, no, this is going to C tier. These albums, like, the strengths on Load and Reload are really good. Like Fuel, Memory Remains, that's all that Reload has. And then, like, you've got King Nothing, Until It Sleeps, Ain't My Bitch is actually really good. And then you've got songs like Hero of the Day, which I think is actually really cool. And you've got like Bleeding Me, Outlaw Torn's okay. But then like I can't even name any of the other songs on the albums, and that's kind of where I think these fall flat, because I just can't name a single one of the songs on those albums. They're very forgetful albums. It's a very experimental album. Both of them, I think, like Reload only gets this spot because the songs were so forgetful that I just don't even remember what the songs were. Load, I remember not remembering what the songs were, but I never got bored listening to it. It was like background music. Like Reload was like, this background music's annoying, I need to turn it off. So for that, it goes where it is. Now we've got two albums that are like not even really albums, but they're included because I did listen to everything. I did listen to all the albums in like over the course of like a month, and this was one I listened to. This album is going here. Like there's some good covers, but I can't remember a single one of the songs. Like, and the fact that I can't remember a single one of the songs kind of just immediately, you know, makes it not worth it, because I didn't want to listen to the song. I thought the production was actually quite bad. Again, it felt more punk. It didn't feel like a Metallica album. It felt like a nu metal 90s. Like, I mean, even the album cover just screams like, you know, Limp Bizkit, which is just not what you want to do. But yeah, I'm not a huge fan of it. I can't remember a single song, so for that, it's whatever it is. The first S&M, I'm putting this in B tier. I think, obviously it's a live album, so in that retrospect, it can't really go any higher than it is. You can't judge it on the same category as a studio album, but in terms of quality, it's really, really good. I think it has some really, really interesting ideas. I think the idea of doing Metallica with a symphony is actually really interesting, and some of the songs really work. Obviously, Nothing Else Matters worked amazing because of the fact that it's all an instrumental. You get some cool moments like, I think Enter Sandman has a really good job with it as well. Some songs definitely don't work with the symphony. Like, I don't think, like Sad But True really worked with it. I loved the originals. I think Battery actually worked quite well with it. The symphony, I felt, didn't work with the songs that were very, like, the whole song is just non-stop, like the full chunks. Like Master Puppets it didn't work for. Obviously in the slow moment, it worked fantastic. But any moment where it was like the band is going 110 miles an hour, just non-stop chugging away, it didn't really work. It worked the best on songs where there's a lot of dead space and there's a lot of free space in between. That's why it worked so well on a song like, I guess, what's the song I was just thinking of? I've actually completely forgot what song I was thinking of. Like for him, the bell tolls, it worked on, because the whole time, it's like, even the core Cthulhu, it's very, very like freeing. It's not power the whole way through, but even besides that, it's an enjoyable listen. The original songs are really cool. The actual entire like layout was really awesome. It's a very interesting listen. It's definitely not something I like actively want to listen to, like any live album. No, I don't think anyone's like, I want to listen to the live version, unless it's like Kiss, because Kiss's production is terrible. But that's where I'm putting it. Alright, now we have, I don't even know what to say. Like, it's interesting, and there are some parts of it that were cool, but best way to describe this album is that this album was holding a band together that was falling apart, and this album should not have seen the light of day. This album's a therapy session, and it's a very bad therapy session. If you've seen the documentary, you know why the album turned out the way it did. I'm not gonna. You've heard it 100 times. You know why this album sucks. You know that Lars Ulrich just doesn't know how to make good production sounding drums, and it's terrible. But anyway, moving on. Death Magnetic. This is an interesting album. I'm actually going to put it here. Now, I did enjoy it overall more than Kill 'Em All. And the reason for that is because the songs have some unique bearings. The key word is, you know what, no, I'm not even going to pretend. No, it's actually not that good. The highs on this album are really cool. Like, I think Suicide and Redemption, like the middle part's really good. Like from like the 3-minute part until like the 7-minute part, it's amazing. That Was Just Your Life's really good. Cyanide's pretty cool. My Apocalypse is easily the strongest song on this album, and it's the shortest. And this album just is, it's not forgetful like Load or Reload, where I can't even name the songs, but it is kind of overdone. It's taking Injustice for All and just over the top, it was ridiculous. But there's definitely some highlights, for sure, but it's not perfect. It's not really. I think the production on this album is, again, not very good. I think the highs are highs. I think the lows are just really boring. It's not unlistenable like this one, but there's just not really much going on. It's very over the top. Some of the songs just last way too long. Like the average time for a song is like 7 minutes, and it's just like, why? The only thing I will say that gives this album like some heads up is the fact that it's only 10 songs. Like, the fact that they didn't try to make 12 songs that were all the fucking same were probably a good choice. It did let the songs have a bit more of a presence, but this is definitely, like, it was Metallica taking a step in the right direction, but I think it would have benefited if they maybe tried to, like, even do 8 songs and maybe try to incorporate some more cool ideas, or even do longer songs. I mean, do more songs and put some of the ideas, because some songs had parts where it was just like, this part didn't feel like it matched with this part, and I don't know, it just didn't really work for me. But at the same time, highs were really good. I think Suicide and Redemption is a very underrated track, but yeah. Now this is where I'm going to probably get the most hate. I'm putting this album here. I actually love Hardwired to Self-Destruct. Now, lots of bias here. This was my first ever Metallica album. So in that regard, when I listened to this album again, with everything else, I had to keep my bias out of it, and I did my absolute best. And I can say very comfortably that even with my bias taken out of it, I think that this album is a lot stronger Okay, it's not as strong as the Black Album. That's a lie. I'm not gonna get that much hate. This album to me has, like, the first disc on this album, I think the only somewhat bad track is Now That We're Dead. I think it's a little bit too generic, but at the same time it's not bad. I think the generic side of it can work. I'm not one of those people who thinks that you have to make this song super interesting all the time. Sometimes basic is better, but like, I would say that Now That You're Dead is very reliant on the drums and the main hook. But it's very similar to like other songs. The second side of the disc, I would definitely say, has more forgetful tracks. Like Am I Savage is very, very boring. And Murder 1 isn't very strong. But Here Comes Revenge is actually quite interesting. I think they could have done more with the verse side of it for sure. Confusion's actually not a bad track. It's just that the Confusion, Am I Savage, Here Comes Revenge, and Murder 1 kind of sound like the same song, just with different variations. Spit Out the Bone, though, is amazing, and there's no denying that. This is Metallica's best work in ages. It's actually really, really awesome. Hardwired's amazing. Atlas Rise is awesome. Moth into Flame is probably my favorite Metallica song ever. Hell on Fire, I think, had some parts that could have been cut down, but it was still, again, this was like Metallica overdoing it, but not as much. They were able to kind of cut more of the fat off, and it made for some really, really awesome songs. So yeah, that's why I'm putting it there. And it's also just way more enjoyable to listen to. And again, the songs do have more of an identity, so that's another reason why I'm putting it where they are. S&M 2, and I don't know, here. Again, it's kind of like the enjoying, or no, it's going a D tier. I'm sorry. S&M 2 has some really cool moments, but the fact that 95% of the setlist is just the same songs from S&M 1, but it's like newer Metallica, and I'm sorry to say, but I think 90s Metallica sounded better live. I think new Metallica has a very generic way of playing it, and that's obviously just come with age. Like, you know, they still sound good, but it's not as interesting. It's a little bit generic. It just feels like a standard setlist with like a couple of bits every now and then. I think they possibly picked they picked Moth into Flame, which is a huge highlight. But at the same time, I don't think they picked the right songs for the new albums. I think they really missed out on an opportunity. I think the Unforgiven 3 was a really good choice, but I think they missed out. Again, they didn't include like some of the older tracks that they could have used. Like, they haven't done Fade to Black. They haven't done, like, I don't think they've done Sanitarium. And Sanitarium would be an amazing one to do with an orchestra. They didn't do, like, on Hardwired, Muffin to Flame, as much as my favorite song, I don't think it's a good song for S&M. Confusion, definitely not. Hell on Fire was definitely a good choice. I think Spit Out the Bone would have been really good. As much as it's, like, very power the entire way, it had more room to breathe, because it's a very operatic power. It's kind of like a power metal ballad, so I think it could have worked a bit better. The vibe would have fit more. I think, like, a song like even Now That We're Dead would have fit a little bit more in, or more actually, I would have said Dream No More would have been the song I would have picked out of any of the songs for Hardwired. For Death Magnetic, Suicide and Redemption would have been really cool, but at the same time, it is what it is. I think the fact they used Anesthesia was really cool. I just wish they did a bit more. I think even All Within Our Hands was actually quite cool, like the acoustic one. That was actually really cool. But then again, there was a lot of like the same thing. Like it starts the exact same way as the first one. It has like the same set list until The Day That Never Comes, which I will admit, that was good. That was one of the better choices to do, and it just made me wish there was Fade to Black. If I ever do an S&M 3, they need to just not do the normal songs and just do like S&M could have been like just a bunch of new stuff, and then like the two orchestral parts in the middle, like the guys like, all right, we're gonna play this piece because this piece is the first metal piece or whatever it was, and that was kind of cool, but at the same time, I think in disc form, that doesn't work. Like, I'm sure as like, you know, someone listening to it, it's cool. But at the same time, if you're wanting this entire experience to be like this thought-provoking, like complete risk, complete whatever it is, don't do the safe songs. Like, do a whole new set list that is completely different to the first one. Don't have a single repeat, unless obviously it's like a song that you guys perform way differently now. But I don't know, I just don't think it worked. And with the final album, 72 Seasons. This album to me, I think, goes at the top of B tier. Now, this album was obviously interesting. I had to listen to it twice because the first time I ever listened to the album was for specifically this. I love Lux Eterna. Lux Eterna is probably my favorite song Metallica has done in a long time, and it just made me wish that the rest of the album was like that. I think the rest of the album just didn't live up to the expectation. This is Metallica at a stage where they can kind of just release the art they want, and that's completely fine. They can do that. They can just make music for the sake of making music and people can listen to it. I understand that. But there's definitely a reason that If Dark Inside the Sun and Screaming Suicide are like the most forgetful songs on this entire album. If Dark Inside the Sun, actually, in my opinion, people said like the intro with the main, like just the one note for like a whole minute was kind of boring. And yeah, it was. But I think it actually could have been something more. I think the song takes a really wild direction. 72 Seasons was like the starting track. It was very cool, but the fact that in the first 2 minutes there's like 6 different riffs, like it seems like they do 4 bars of one riff, 4 bars of another riff, 4 bars of a completely different riff, and then it's like, okay, now we're into the song. None of the songs here have an identity, which sucks. Hardwired, all the songs had an identity. On this album, like, all the songs are like the exact fucking same. There's like no difference. It's annoying, but it's actually still more listenable than like everything else, because at least the songs have, like, I really like modern Metallica production, and I think that, like, again, this album could have benefited more from the more subtle moments, and I'm hoping they start to do that. I'm hoping they go into a more subtle direction. I'm hoping the fact that this album came out way sooner than everyone was expecting could probably mean that they are going to be willing to, I guess, do more. I just want Metallica's last album to be a banger, and I hate for this to be their last album. I just think it's very generic, it's very repetitive. There's not a lot of interesting ideas, and it feels like it's trying to be like a critical piece. And then there's Lux Eterna, which, like, Lux Eterna feels so different compared to the rest of this album, and Lux Eterna is just so much better. I just wish they would go more into like that direction. But with that, that's all their albums ranked. This is my official list. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Make sure to like and subscribe. Let me know other bands I should do tier lists on. And I will see you guys in the next video. Bye bye.